Today, unfortunately, Jess is not very well, and she's very regrettably had to pull out, and she sends her apologies to everybody. So we were both just saying if you were looking forward to hearing more from her side, from the illustrator, or the challenges that she faces. Unfortunately, it'd be just me and Piers today, but we really appreciate anybody throwing in their comments into the chat, even if not even questions, even just their things about where you're at. If you were running a small, what we've called micro studio, but I suppose that could mean many things, from one-man teams right the way through to smallish groups of people, freelancers, all sorts of people within that category. Please just add your thoughts and comments in there. While we're getting going, Piers, can I throw it over to you just to give us a bit of a background on yourself, the business, and just where you're at?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for coming along. And yeah, sorry, like Jess was the poster girl for this event, so sorry for anybody who's been misled by my ugly mug showing up rather than Jess's. Yeah, thanks. I'm Pierce O'Halloran. I am the graphic designer, and I'm running Loom Studio, Loom Graphics, which is in Stornoway in the Isle of Lewis. So probably the most northerly attendee of these festival events. So I've been running the studio for over 4 years now, and before that I was a freelancer for like years and years, and I had a few jobs here and there. But yeah, this Loom Studio is really where like this whole sort of micro agency thing came to be, because I was kind of sick of just it all just being about me, but I also didn't really, and I still don't really massively want to go on and like expand out the business to some global marketing agency or something. I still wanted to be at the core of it. I want to be getting my hands dirty and messing about with designs. So yeah, and I kind of spotted a sort of gap in the market up here with shop stuff as well. I felt as though there was a big touristy community up here. Like people coming in from the island every summer. Is really busy just now as well. These cruise ships coming in. And yeah, I just felt as though all the designs for the t-shirts, etc., and usual merchandise in the shops was very it could do with a sort of injection of some contemporary graphics. So we built up the shop side of things as well as part of the studio. Yeah, I have got Chris, who's in with me. He's an employee. He works 12 hours. He runs the sort of shop and admin side and the social media stuff. And then there was Freya up until start of May. She was the junior designer here, but she left to go to another agency down in Glasgow. I mean, the island was far too small for her ambitions at this stage. So I will be looking for another junior designer soon enough, maybe after the summer. But what was great, she would support me then on design projects where I would sort of lead it and, come up with a lot of the initial strategies with her help, and sort of the more end process where you just have to get the assets ready and the social media graphics. And once the creative is sorted, there's a lot of sort of elbow grease in the job. So Freya would support me on that. And again, she was at just 18 hours. So yeah, it's kind of like between the two of them, it was like having an extra full-time person. So yeah, and my wife's managing director as well. So she's just kind of like managing director slash moral support now and then. So that's kind of like the makeup of the studio as such. So it isn't all me. Like at the core of it, all the ideas and the creative and whatever. And as I said, I'm still kind of hands-on with getting doing all the graphic design elements of it. But yeah, but it is just more than me at this stage. And it's just yeah, it's just a nice size. And I obviously work with freelancers as well. There's a couple of people who do the motion side of stuff as well. So yeah, I've got a motion designer, and when I need him to like make the logos sing and dance, I just like send him a storyboard and the logo, and he does his magic. And that's great to have that asset as well, so that it's a freelancer I use regularly. And I sometimes take other freelancers and artists in to help out with branding projects as well. So yeah, so from all those years of sort of doing things by myself, I kind of I actually decided to kind of go, right, let's call this an actual studio. And when I do say, the we thing, it is actually we, So but yeah, but still at the core of it, I'm too much of an egomaniac to let anybody control the creative process. So it's still essentially me at that side of things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite common, isn't it? That perfectionist ego thing. It doesn't have to be negative. Sometimes it could come across as negative, but something that you're talking there about where the studio is. I think there's a tendency in design to think that all the good stuff is happening in the capital, regional capitals, or the larger populated parts of the country and world. When the reality is there's small pockets all over, but they're just not as well recognised or as elevated as others are. How did you find that because you moved to Stornoway, didn't you? You're not a native of Stornoway, are you?
Oh no, no, no. This is a Southern Irish accent, so I'm like completely the opposite ends of the British Isles from where I started. Yeah.
Yeah, so that leap, was that I presume that was maybe a family related thing, but what was the business worries around that about being isolated? Was it a desire just to work within a specific location, so that was what would feed the creativity, or did you think working remotely it just doesn't matter?
There was genuinely no thought about career progress at that stage because we had young kids, and I'd left a pretty good job at the science center in Glasgow just because it didn't fit like that. I couldn't go part-time, so it was either that like if so all decisions were made around taking care of the kids because they become priority. So when my wife was offered a job up here, we were like, wow, what an amazing place to raise your kids, like, in the Isle of Lewis. And we kept reading about here in Shetland and Orkney, they're always like top three in terms of places to raise children in the UK type of thing. So we're like, look, it's nowhere near. I'm not bound by geography. I was just I had freelance clients in Glasgow. Let's just go up there. And like every client that I spoke to about I'm moving to, and they were like, yeah, that's fine. I was kind of had a reservation that they somehow might sort of ditch me if I'm going to be, but we were like, we just do work on email anyway. So I didn't even figure about what the business landscape was here, or whether I'd pick up business here. I was just kind of satisfied that, none of my clients were going to be dropped, so I could come up here. I could kind of, and I felt that way. It was just sort of like an upgrade in your sort of local neighborhood nature walk. We used to just in Glasgow walk around by the canal, whereas and now you just we have a stunning beach 2 minutes down the road. So that's all I felt, as though like sort of living standards would kind of go up, and that I would still kind of retain the same number of clients. And I genuinely had no sort of notion that this was going to and I knew working remotely as well that that I could easily pick up clients anywhere and everywhere in between. But what I found, and why the progression to the studio happened, was that once word kind of got out that there was like a graphic designer on the island, people started, like, the local art center was the first kind of big job where they got me in. They had like money from Creative Scotland to do a brand refresh, and they asked me to kind of like take care of it. And that was great for me, because that was something that was a quite a big gig for just a sort of bedroom freelancer to get. But I knew I was up to the level of it, and it just sort of struck me then that even though geography wasn't an issue, but they just like to keep things in the island economy. There's certain kind of companies up here, and so Harris Tweed Hebrides, which is like a global brand, they got in touch with me, and they started me doing smaller ads, but then suddenly started like, okay, well, we've got our summer campaign coming up. So I started noticing that like my portfolio was more and more kind of full of kind of island businesses and people up this end of the country. So like, without even knowing it, it actually just was like a massive boost to my career as such, because I wouldn't have I wouldn't have been able to walk to an art center and just Johnny freelancer and just kind of go, yeah, I'll do your branding for you. But it was just because you're sort of like this one of the only fish in the pond up here type of thing. And they can kind of see that from your portfolio you're up to a certain standard, and then things progress like that. So yeah, and I keep finding really great businesses that come to me and whatever that are around here, and they're all sort of like these are companies that would normally kind of go to the central belt in Scotland or the mainland in general for their design work. that they kind of now realize that they just can keep things on the island. And even though like even though I am on the island and I could call over to them in 5 minutes, I'm still working on the laptop. So it's weird that like geography is still not an issue for me doing it. But they just still kind of like the fact that you have a Stornoway address and you're kind of up this end of the country type of thing. So yeah.
I think that's really important to remember, isn't it? Because I know when I first started, I sort of went from freelance to start my own. It was just a case. We were talking about this actually earlier. For anybody that tuned in with Chloe, who was the chatty freelancer who's based in Glasgow, we were talking about this idea, the difference between being a freelancer where you just use your own name to a business of one. I'll just use some sort of a word that you just fancy just to call your business. They're really the same thing. It's just that you maybe for privacy, or you just don't like putting yourself out there. You prefer to put the business out there. You choose one or the other. But to remember that, I when I did that studio thing, I just sort of, my attention went straight to London. It was to try to find work from there, because I've been attuned or conditioned throughout my whole career to think that's where all the good briefs are. That's where the money is. That's where the best talent is. And you sort of just begin to believe what you've been told for 10 years since starting out. But without realising actually on my doorstep, there's loads of opportunities, but I just sort of dismissed them ignorantly, I think, because you just thought they were going to be second grade. Without realising actually when you get to a certain age, it was actually really a lot of pride working with businesses in your own area, because it did keep the local economy afloat. There was a sense of a cultural connection through language and all these other things that we know of in our own cities and regions. That must be really, really nice for you to have. You could see the footprint of your work within a quite a small radius. And as a small business owner and a studio, that's where reputation, network, return work comes from, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've just done an art trail guide for Open Studio Hebrides. So those posters have gone up everywhere. And so like there's a moment where I see one of those posters on the street, a van for Lewis Builders, who I did the branding for, that'll pull up, and then I'll walk past the art center that still has the thing, So there is a nice kind of giving back, service, giving back to the community kind of aspect of it. And I don't I try and work with businesses, smaller businesses to do their branding. Like I have certain kind of limits on my rates, etc. But if it's a good project and they're a good startup and I kind of feel as though I really like them, then I'll get involved. And it's really lovely when you can kind of give them that push. And I know that I can give them graphics to a standard that they'll get at like some top agency, which they'll never be able to afford, but because I'll be able to work with them. So and I get a real kick out of that, working with businesses and feeling, sharing in their successes, on the island. And there's and there's plenty of businesses, and it's really nice. There's plenty of businesses that have come up here where I've kind of looked at their branding and I'm like, it's such a great company. They've got a great product and they're in such a lovely location and all this kind of stuff. But just the graphics are just like, really letting them down. And they kind of just did something like, with somebody local years ago, and it's like, it's so substandard. So it's really nice that they've kind of been interested in like, oh, what would you think type of thing. And you immediately have all these ideas because it's such a great company to kind of like bring their brand out. And that's it, Chris. There's like I think people, you'd be surprised about the amount of people, even if you are in remote locations, about the amount of people doing really cool things that really need kind of nice marketing and branding, etc.
Yeah. And onto the more specifics of actual that's more an overview of your position, your location, and how you got there. From the point of things like, for anybody that's watching that's maybe looking to take the step or is already in those early phases of owning a business, it's a scary, daunting place, and there's a lot of things to do, except for the design sometimes seems to come secondary, if not further down that chain of list of things to do. If we say, how do you go about, or how did you at the start, or how do you evolve the idea of what you charge? So when you're looking at, do you do it per project basis, hourly, day rates, retainers? What does that work for you?
So it is like year on year, I sort of have like a minimum kind of hourly rate, and you know, as I said, with those smaller businesses, if we can kind of get it down to that smaller end of the hourly rate where we just kind of cover our overheads type of thing, then you know, then I can work with them. But there's a certain kind of rate which you know, underneath that where it will not be worth it. But then obviously for the larger kind of, there's a couple of like genuine multinational brands as clients, and their rate goes up a lot more because you know what you're trying to do, it's more precious and specialist for what want to do there. So I charge a higher rate for those guys, but as well as that, I don't necessarily break things down into hours either. You know, if I'm costing up project, it's there are certain things that you can just actually, as I was saying there earlier about, like, you know, outputting assets and style guides. And if it's a print design project, we do a lot of print design projects, then you can kind of sort of calculate, right, once we've kind of figured out the layout template, those few hours, you can go almost multiply it by like how many pages the document is, type of thing. So you can almost mechanically price it like that. But what I like to do with branding jobs is actually, you know, have the sort of branding creative, but that's not like timed. That's me sort of coming up with a price where like the actual, you know, it could take me like and 5-10 minutes to come up with a brilliant idea, and like it's like and that brilliant idea for the brand will be the strength of the whole thing. So that 5-10 minutes, you know, am I just gonna charge like 1/5 of an hour, so you know? So it's so I just kind of have a healthy kind of price at the start of a brand project, because I know what you're looking for there is strong creative ideas, and those strong creative ideas aren't sort of time based. So I'll often kind of like, and especially with a brand project, kind of consider where the company's at, consider where, like, you know, how much value a good strong idea behind this brand will be, and because like obviously that will continue on for all their marketing, etc., and drive more sales and all that. So I sit with a figure that was like, you know, if this takes me like half a morning or a whole week, you know, it doesn't matter. It's just like, you know, if I just to come up with that like really great as I have done, is always two great concepts. How long will that take me, and how much should is that, how much of a value does that have for this company? So once I kind of like, and that's a bit of a dark art in terms of like, or like a magic. There's no sort of mechanical process on like divide X amount by zero type of thing. But I do kind of look at like, if it's a startup, you know, obviously it's not at this moment, it's not as valuable. But if it's like, you know, a bit bigger company, whatever, I'd even look at sort of the company's turnovers and all that kind of stuff, and I'd kind of calculate in how much that should be. And then once I've kind of calculated that, then I can actually just go, and once we kind of have that brand look cracked, then I can just go like, well, it'll take me like 6-7 hours to do a style guide, or you know, or like, you know, extra few hours for the social media, and a motion will be a few more hours after that. So then I can actually just stack things up in terms of actual time once we've cracked the yeah. So pricing for branding is always changed. Yeah. So
And I suppose within that, you can then have breakdowns of individual assets, can't you?
mhm.
If you've got a project fee that might include X, Y, Z that's been agreed either via a brief or a tender, etc., you can then still have additional elements, can't you, which you can break down on a project or piece by piece basis to make
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. If the client has requested it, then yeah, you can yeah, and you can divide up the project in terms of like add-ons, you know, like, so a lot of people don't want motion or whatever like that, so you can add the motion on and divide things up that way in terms of pricing a project, yeah. And sometimes as well as that, if people are struggling with a budget, you can say, right, we can do this chunk of a project, we'll do everything you need to do now, and then like, if especially if it's a startup, and once you're on your feet and whatever, we'll do all this other fancy stuff to kind of like you know, once you start once the actual cash flow gets a bit healthier from the business side, then we can do the rest later, like, yeah.
That doesn't happen very often.
No.
And I think my concern is, in recently I've noticed a huge amount of airtime to big brand projects, through blogs, magazines, social media. And the reality, from my perspective, for 24 years, has not really been many of those. You get asked to do a few every now and then, but they're very few and far between compared to the bread and butter work. And that is a very different structure, isn't it, from when you're costing it, when you're thinking about profit and the time it will take. You've got to remember that your services or your time is valuable, and it's always remembering, but it's how to understanding what its value is, and sometimes choosing it depending on the way. Like say, a local client to you would have a different spend to somebody in not London, obviously, or Glasgow, wouldn't they? So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like I did have the mistake of like when I was a freelancer, just sort of like having that one kind of rate, and then anybody who called up, yeah, that's my rate. And like, and I'm kind of it's nice. One of the things I know is that there's been more and more of the clients are slightly coming back to me, and it's a good thing. They're coming back to me saying, I think that's just a little bit too high. And I'm like, okay, well, we can dial it back down, like, a few notches. And that's good because like there was too many clients in the early days where I would be like, they'd almost kind of go, really? Is that your price? As in like, and I suddenly realized, shit, if I just actually charged about, they were expecting to pay 2 or 3 times what I actually came up with as a quote, but it's just that way of like, I'd work with sort of the local sort of hairdresser down the road. I would charge them the same as like, oh, another big company kind of coming in, oh yeah, no bother, it's the same rate. And you're like, it's not as mechanical as that. You have to sort of like, value the work, and it's a sliding scale.
yeah, and also trying to gauge it so that you can work towards return customers. A small studio, that's really important to have that.
Yeah,
Very rarely would a small business ask for a retainer because they wouldn't have that many requirements for creative permanently or on a day-to-day, weekly basis. But when you're first starting out, or if your aim is to stay relatively small, having that word of mouth circle where they come back and they refer you, and all of those sorts of positivity aspects, they're very important, especially when you think about where you are. It's
yeah.
crucial, isn't it, not to burn bridges.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, not to burn bridges, and just it takes a bit of trial and error, but it's also like, to not undersell yourself either,
Mm.
So yeah, it's very important that
Finding that balance is, I think, is probably one of the hardest things you can do. I think as a small business in any industry, especially design, when it's quite subjective, isn't it? A lot of people seem to think it's a click of the fingers and it pops out the printer, as
yeah.
opposed to realizing that you spend a lot of time, research and experimenting and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I had a job that went pretty bad this past year, and I had the director of the company phone me up, and he was basically like, I basically, not getting too much, but I always ask for a deposit up front for a project, and so it was just like, it ran on and on and on. So it was a branding project plus like, the front end development of a website. So it just went on and on and on. And they just couldn't make up their minds. And I was on version 14 of something, and it was just like, anyway, I was just plowing. I plowed like way more time than I charged into it. And then like, and they were like really annoyed that it was taking so long. And I was like, so anyway, I had to terminate the project, and it was so I just like that's in my terms of business, that like, I'm entitled to cancel the project anytime, and also that like I keep the deposit as well, and I'm also able to charge for any hours over and above the deposit kind of that I said. And even without charging them the over and above, which they had completely, like they were asking for their deposit back. And it was just like, because they were just like, oh, all we got is a logo, and you priced up for all these other things like a style guide, but I couldn't make the style guide because they kept going back and go, maybe we should change the blue kind of thing, and it was just driving me crazy. And I did have the director of the company just like, he's a guy, the company's like, it's a food industry company, so he just had zero notion of what, like, goes into sort of like, he couldn't believe that, like, like that he had actually, he was like, have I just paid you for a squiggle? It's just basically, in terms of like, because that's the only thing we kind of sorted was the sort of new direction of the logo. And like, we couldn't sort anything else because it was just a nightmare of a branding process. And like, I sent them like, I sent them over, it was like 100 PDFs or something that I'd made in a project. But the guy was just like, he just was raging on the phone. He was just like, God, I paid you all this money and all I got was a squiggle and all this. And I was like, man, that's crazy. But it just could, those people are out there, like, absolutely out there. And it's so important to get contracts in. And what we learned off the back of that was about like so I had like a time kind of thing where it was just spreadsheets, but we set up like zero in our zero there's a project section. So now what we do is like we just kind of time things up, and if they were an anomaly, let's say, thank goodness every other project's been really good. But what we do now is like anytime we work on a project, we clock up the hours, and I have a thing in the contract that's like, so if basically if they take ages to get back to me, I can just clock off and invoice the hours that we've worked, you know, and put in for the time that we've worked on it, So there was sort of lessons learned off the back of that where I didn't really kind of like wasn't charging them for the sort of delay that was put in place. But yeah, no, absolutely. There's like definitely people who can just don't kind of grasp the value of what you do whatsoever, and that could be right up at the top level of a business,
Yeah, and do you have to, as well as taking deposits and putting in financial structure, do you have other boundaries that you try and set out, or have you had to learn that as you go along due to poor relationships? Because I know I've had to do that. I blasé or naively thought everybody was going to be as on the same track as me, positively thinking that we're going to work together harmoniously to create, beautiful stuff, and everybody's going to be happy at the end of it and release this, game-changing brand, and they will make millions of pounds and come back and, spend
Yeah.
more. When very, very quickly I learned a very harsh lessons, from not being paid for 4 months to when you actually do get paid, that money is pretty irrelevant because it's just been swallowed up in many other areas of
Yeah, 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 yeah.
financial work, to work being used without sign off. So it was full of errors and it had watermarks on pictures, but they just didn't care. They just used it, and then we questioned it and they were like, it's not in use. And then I point to a link on their website, it's there. Then they say the person that signed off doesn't work there. And then you find out they're still working it. All these sorts of toxic, really odd ways people work.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've had to gradually set out, what seems to be an endless list of boundaries now, which I don't want to do, but it seems like you have to do it. Is that something you've experienced, and you just have to then start to work towards safeguarding your own mental and physical health?
Oh yeah, that's something something the naivety of freelance when I was like I didn't I remember I didn't even have like a terms of business or anything freelancing. I would just kind of go on a verbal contract of like, yeah, no problem. I'll and that way of like when all the work is done, I'll send the invoice type of thing, which is like kind of crazy. I always ask for some deposit up front, and it also what I find with that is that it's more professional, and it kind of gives a commitment from the client as well. That yeah, so that's definitely protecting, like your time is precious, my time is precious. So like one of the regrets of that project that went wrong was like all the hours that we just kind of lost on that. And it's just such, it's just, oh man, I just keep thinking about like all these other kind of design project plans, because as I said there, we've kind of got a shop, so I've got all these great ideas for the shop, but I never kind of get enough time to do them because I'm so taken up with this client work. So I kind of have to protect the time that I'm working on, and that if anybody wants my time, as I said, it's precious and it's protected, and it's up to you how the client kind of uses that time well as well. So it's their responsibility as well. But yeah, absolutely, I've been burned so many times in the past, and so many crazy stories of like yeah, there was one woman, and she was like a beauty therapist, and I never even, it was weird, she like lived down the road from me and she wanted a logo, And I was like, oh yeah, way back in the early days of like freelancing. And I was like, yeah, no problem. I didn't even email her. I didn't even have any track because I was actually just calling into the shop with some printouts of logos and stuff. And I had 2 or 3 rounds of revisions, and we were kind of getting there. And it was all this kind of Greek kind of like symbolism that she wanted. And then I went down and I was like, I sent her, so I called her up and or she texted me and she said, "Oh yeah, we don't actually, I don't need the logo anymore. Thank you." And I was like, "What do you mean you don't need the logo anymore?" So like I went and called down to her and I called on to her with my invoice of the hours that I worked, and she was like, had this big actual argument in the shop about like how she wasn't going to pay for it because she didn't. I was like, yeah, and what she had done is like she'd obviously just gone to a printing company and she got like new leaflets done, and the printing company, because like that's what they did, they just said like, oh yeah, we'll do your logo, and it was like this bit of stock with like the company the name on it, and it was like, so they just did it for free in terms of like just getting our print business and just knock something together in like 5-10 minutes. And she was just shouting at me in the shop about like, oh, you don't go into an art gallery and charge people for looking at the paintings. Again, that was again another analogy of like the design process and like how invaluable it was. But yeah, and that was one of the first times I went like, I need to get like a term of business. I need to put something down in black and white. And because I know even email thread, I couldn't even kind of pull her up in terms of like anything she said. But yeah, so definitely protect your time is precious. No matter what stage you are, like even people I say who are graduates, you spent like 2-3 years of your life studying this stuff, so like your time is precious. So like having this sort of self-confidence in your work, and don't like undersell yourself, or don't be get into, like as you said, notice these toxic places or toxic clients where you just get abused.
Yeah, and on that, when you're talking about that, they just go to a print shop and they'll just grab a pair of scissors off Shutterstock and they'll
Yeah.
just put a name next to it. Do you get to a point, or have you got to a point? And it is, I suppose, it is a slightly privileged point when you can sort of have a little bit of a cushion financially, where you say no to some people now. It's a case of it's not worth. You can sort of see the red flags, because I think we have to remember a lot of the time clients aren't creative. That's why they're coming to us. So
Yeah.
people that are just inherently just want, they've got a small business themselves. They just sell a product. They don't need a brand. They don't want positioning. They don't need naming. They don't want, all the stuff that goes with that. The complexities of that. Not everybody is ambitious that wants to create a new brand that's going to be, a game-changing challenger.
No,
Some
no.
people just are happy just to set up a little business in their local area, and they just need, enough to get them by. Do you have that? Actually, this isn't really worth it for us. Even a small amount of money is just not worth,
Uh,
committing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been quite a nice. I realize it's like I have been saying no to projects, and it's really nice. It's actually because I went to one of these design talks ages ago, and the guy like he was like, oh, he put up a yes on the thing, and it's like the power of yes. Yes opens up so many doors. Oh yeah, you open up one opportunity and that opportunity becomes, and I was sitting there thinking like, this is BS, man. Because it's like sometimes like, yeah, it opens up doors, but sometimes it leads to a room where you don't want to be, with more closed doors and other doors closed. Like the power of no, man. It's really it's a powerful thing, and that yeah, there's a certain desperation when you are starting out and trying to get clients, and you're just saying yes to everything, yes or no sir, and then you just off you go. But then there's a certain point where you build up a certain cachet of clients and reputation, whatever, that you have to sort of like, you have to realize where like you are in the ladder. And it's like there are definitely plenty of things, because again that I'm local, like I will help out like things, and there's often like pals or like people who run like community things, and I'm like, yeah, that'll take me like no time at all. I'll quickly just to do a nice thing for people, like, so I'm not just completely, but I do realize that there are certain businesses. There is a printing company here on the island, and I'll send people their way because I realize that they have their own sort of graphics team. But again, like that, it's more the sort of like mechanical kind of graphics thing where people just need something that looks nice on a brochure. It doesn't need the whole strategy and development behind it. So I'll happily pass them off to kind of those guys if they are just like a plumber who needs, like, a nice kind of logo free business card or something like that, that you go over there. So I have been kind of working off like a £500 kind of project minimum, that, like, anything under that, I kind of don't want to take anything less than that into the company. And I think it's like drawing up that ladder. I've been that way for the past 6 months in terms of like projects come in. If I price it up and in my head, if this isn't over 500 quid, then I'm like, actually maybe it's better off like going with somebody else or whatever. And so I just feel, and then I'm hoping that in another 6 months, maybe we can draw that ladder up again, and it's like £1,000, if there's anything less than the 4K figure. So there's a certain kind of growth in that as well, that, like, to take something on and to book our time. And as I said, it's a we, so it's like, more mouths to feed. So yeah, so knowing where you are on the ladder, and yeah, the power of saying no, man, because again, if I'd said no to that client that just like wasted loads of my hours, that would have been amazing, because I wouldn't have been so stressed at the start of this year, and I probably could have got a lot more done, So red flags, as you said, Chris, trying to get more screwed into where those red flags are, and realizing early on what clients, if a client is actually engaged with you, and you can kind of just get a sense and just general personality with people, a sixth sense of, like, one of the things I find, if people start to quibble about your price and they start to kind of like hum and haw, when you get down to sort of like trying to take like a 50 quid here or another hour there and stuff, I kind of get a sense that's one of the red flags, where I get a sense that they're really like, no matter what you design isn't going to be good enough for them, because they need to be coming to you to kind of go like, oh yeah, like at a base level, they realize that your work is of a standard that they're going to pay for it, and they're committed to paying for it, that kind of way.
Yeah, understanding that chain, like you mentioned, is really important, because the guys at a printer, even when you send print ready artwork off, there's still usually a designer in that business that has to press it, get it ready for press, and and do things to it from an artworking sense. So for a quick job for a local business, that will take them maybe a couple of hours, but what they get in return is all of the print run, so that they make their money out of the printing for that business. That hierarchy, I think it's really good. It's not like you're giving up on work, or you're not, you're too good to do it. It's just that there is just certain levels within the structure of the industry that sort of support certain people. But talking about time, as you mentioned earlier about your time being precious and limited, Chris Wilson's just dropped a question. It's good to see you again, Chris. So Chris joined us earlier this week and shared the processes behind the project, which was amazing. It's just put about there, flipping on its head really. We're now going into a conversation about self-promotion, and do you set aside time for social media and marketing and all the other things that, away from client work, come with running a business?
Yeah, well, that's speaking of Chris, is the Chris that works with me. Like when he's in for like, he does 6 hours, 2 days, 6 hours a day, and it's great. So I sit with him, we go through the projects, and I've got him to learn like basically like basics of Premiere Pro, and just basically how to put a reel together. And so if I can give him like a suite of graphics, he's good to. We also have like a social media manager, Feed Hive, so we're able to kind of schedule in posts that way. So like it's good, because like if he wasn't here, then I probably wouldn't, like anybody who's just like a solo person, I probably wouldn't be able to pull my head up out of the parapet long enough to actually go, all right, yeah, social media marketing for myself. What am I meant to do? So we'll always have a plan. We have a we bit of a diary, and as well with the shop side, it also takes a little bit more commitment. It's a different thing, because we're obviously business to business in terms of like our graphic design services. But with the shop thing, like we've got a summer sale coming up because we want to shift some stock over the summer. So we've kind of a promotion ready to do that, and we've got a few new items kind of coming in. So those things, if I need to actually sell stuff in the shop, I actually have to put like the mailing list and the Instagram out, or else all that stuff will just sit on the shelves, type of thing. So so that's one of Chris's jobs, is to sort of like make sure that we are constantly kind of peppering things to kind of keep the shop sales up, and also like just generally and not and that way of just doing other things that like is not all sales sales, you know. So we just so on our feed it's like uh so what was the thing, four and one, so it's a right hook punch. So like we have to have four sort of non-salesy ones before we blatantly put up buy our t-shirts or something like that, you know. So yeah, so that's it. I definitely it's great having a guy like Chris in, and it's something that you know, he doesn't come from design background. He's just he at all, like, you know, and it's great. He just organizes and just does the admin, and we even kind of bookkeeping and some of the invoice sending, and like, you know, so there's a big sort of like admin-y kind of schedule that he comes in and helps me out with it, and it's great, and pitches in with some ideas for the socials as well, and helps me when I want to run around Stornoway with a camera pointed at my face, you know. So helps me edit the videos and stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely he's been great versus like before when it was just me. I did have like I used to have like finance and marketing, and I have 2 mornings kind of clocked off to do that for myself. And it was rare that I actually stuck to it. It was so rare. Like it would just ding, it would just come up like because like with finances, where it's like I block off time to go through invoices and keep the books up to date. And marketing, it's that somebody was explaining to me, it's the sort of like if you're constantly living in the present, you know, as in working on clients, then your business is going to fail because you have to look to the future, which is your marketing, and you have to like take care of the past, which is your books and your bookkeeping and your chasing invoices and all that kind of stuff. So like, you know, but I wasn't really good at that. But since Chris has come in, it's only like, you know, 12 hours a week, and it's great, man. It helps me out so much, and helps me, like my accountant is happy with me when I come in and like all the books are up to date. She's like, "Wow, you're a changed man these days, Pierce." So yeah,
That's something you'd advise them from an owner's perspective, is to focus on the things that you're really good at, and
yeah,
then delegate the things that, you know, maybe not best skilled at, because it frees up time, it's much more interesting, and keeps you motivated doing the things that you love, to pass on those other tasks if affordable and at the right places. You know, like for me, accounting and numbers and paperwork is just something I cannot even begin to stare at. So I have to give it to somebody else, otherwise it wouldn't get done, and I would probably end up in prison. So it's always good to delegate those tasks to people that are better skilled.
yeah, and that's one of the strategies of the company, is that, like, you know, as I said, like I'm kind of, I do the things. It's the people I take on are all about trying to save me time. Like, you know, if I'm with a print design document, or like, you know, that initial that initial setup of the template and the layout and all that sort of stuff. Once we have that sorted, it is a little bit like you'll get into a like 25% of that is kind of it needs a creative strategy and like good knowledge of InDesign and all that. So that's where I do that. But when we had the junior designer here, a lot of it would be just kind of revisions in terms of like coming back from the client. It'd be changing T's and dotting I's and swapping out pictures. And so a lot of that is just, then it becomes like sort of like, just as I keep saying, like elbow grease work. And if I'm there like sort of like just doing all of that, if I can outsource that bit to somebody else that's like a more junior level, they'll enjoy it, because like, you know, Freya here was trying to learn InDesign and get better at it. So she actually enjoyed that. I was like, I'm so long in the tooth, I don't really enjoy that like back and forth. So it was like good for her. It was a positive thing for her to be learning InDesign. But I also then freed up my time to actually like, oh, there's this branding project over here and I need to start that. And I would be starting that while Freya was kind of finishing that one. and then this branding project would be getting there, finalizing the logo or the assets generally. And once we'd finalize them, then Freya would be taking care of the sort of like putting the assets on, and I'd be moving on to something else, instead of constantly being dragged out. A print design goes through 4 or 5 different revisions, and I'm just there kind of going like, oh, I need to get a start in this thing. So that's the way and then when Chris would come in, it'd be like, okay, let's have a little bit of time, right? Just spend an hour with him just to chat through what we need to do, and he'd go off for the few hours, and then suddenly it's like I look at my Zero and all the books are updated, and I suddenly check my phone and I'm like, oh, a post has gone up. You know what I mean? I'm getting all these likes. And I was like, all right, that's because Chris posted that thing yesterday. Great. So it's all about sort of like that I get to do what I do very well, and then the other people around me support me doing that, and they enjoy what they do as well. And as I said, like, I've also had great plans of going off and learning After Effects, but then my guy Callum in Glasgow, he used to work here as well. He's really good at it. So I'm like, you know what, someday I'll learn After Effects, but for now I just kind of like give him a storyboard of what I want to do, and he'll just go off and just like bang, it just comes in really nice. So yeah, so all that sort of time efficiency, as much as I can do what I'm really good at, and I enjoy as well, then like that's to the health and the better the best of the company.
Yeah, and I think at the heart of all of that is the need to collaborate, isn't it? The word, I think, has got a little bit diluted by big brands continually sort of mashing together things that don't belong with each other for the sake of just creating something. I was talking yesterday about in a session yesterday evening we did about should brands collaborate, about Nike and Tiffany. And really, does any of that need to exist? It all just seems so unnecessary when you think about the purpose of collaboration. But when you boil it down, it is that relationship between staff, suppliers, collaborators, all different sorts of partners in different places that allow you to get the best out of yourself on the business. So I think it's a great place to leave it, Piers, because that's another 45 minutes that have vanished within a blink of an eye. And I think it's a subject that myself and many others would like to explore more. So I think maybe it's something we should do moving
Yeah.
forward in the future, and invite more people in on that conversation just to share their experiences too.
Yeah. studio@loom.graphics is my email if anybody wants to pop us an email about any of the other questions after this. I'm happy to take questions. Although I spotted is Katie Lamb on the call.
Yeah.
I've yet to get back to your email, Katie. It's still waiting about pricing, but I'll get back to that. I'll be more efficient in the future.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to email me as well about potentially getting involved in things like this, it'd be good to pull together more, collections of people just to have a very casual, wider conversation about personal experiences, whether you're in employment and looking to take the leap, whether you're in freelance and dipping your toe into starting a studio, or whether you're actually already managing a studio. And like I say with Chris on the call as well, who I know is a one-man team in Glasgow, he is obviously in the thick of it as well. So it's always good to get the full picture and sort of try and understand how we keep going basically at the end of it. So, but until then, it'd be great to hear from anybody. And I am back at what time am I back at? 2:30, I think. With
fatigue is properly hitting.
yeah, with a guy called Danny Matthews. He's running a workshop about finding more clients. That's who it is. So if anybody's interested in that, we'll try and help you.
I'm interested. I might tune in for that. Yeah, definitely.
Global domination of design. Happy days. Right, everybody. It's good to see you all again.
Cheers.
See you soon and keep in touch. Take care.
Cheers, mate.
See you later.